The first thing he noticed was the scent. It wasn't the crisp, clean air of the mountains he'd left behind, but something heavier, sweeter. The air in the Silverwood Palace was thick with the perfume of 1,000 magical blossoms, a cloying fragrance that clung to the back of his throat. The second thing he noticed was the silence. It was a deep, watchful quiet, broken only by the soft chime of crystal wind catchers and the whisper of silk on polished stone. The third thing was the laughter. It wasn't loud or cruel, but that made it worse. It was a gentle, melodic ripple from the line of elven royal guards, a sound as polished and perfect as their silver gilt armor. They stood at attention along the grand hall, but their eyes, the color of ancient forests and winter skies, held a unified expression of amused contempt. Their captain, a tall elf named Kellen with hair like spun moonlight, did not laugh. His disdain was a colder, quieter thing. He looked Evan over as one might examine a strange, mud-caked insect that had crawled onto a pristine dinner table. "The human," Kellen said. The words a statement of profound disappointment. "We were told to expect a specialist, a guardian of some renown." Evan said nothing. He stood, his travel-stained cloak damp from the forest mists, his boots leaving faint smudges on the luminous floor. He was a solid, unremarkable figure in a world of impossible grace and light. His only weapon was a simple longsword strapped to his back, its leather-wrapped hilt worn smooth by use. "The king insists," a slender courtier murmured, averting his eyes from Evan as if the sight pained him. After the incident was a fluke, Kellen replied, his gaze never leaving Evan. "A human arrow in a crowded market. Luck, not a sustained threat. Our wards are the strongest in the land. Our guards can hear a leaf decide to fall. What can he do that we cannot? I can tell you that the third guard from the left hasn't slept in tonight," Evan said, his voice a low, gravelly intrusion in the hall's musical acoustics. "His balance is off, and the one by the tapestry has a lover waiting in the city. He's checked the position of the sun 3 times since I entered." The ripple of laughter died. The guards he'd mentioned stiffened. Kellen's eyes narrowed slightly. Parlor tricks, the captain dismissed, but a new wariness had entered his tone. "Observation. It proves nothing. It proves I'm paying attention," Evan said. "Which is the job, isn't it?" A door of woven living wood swung open, and the Princess Anya entered. The air in the room seemed to shift, to brighten. She was, like all elves, achingly beautiful, with hair the color of a starless night and eyes like a clear summer sky. But where the other elves moved with a fluid, ethereal grace, Anya carried a storm in her wake. Her gown was a deep emerald green, but it seemed to restrain her rather than adorn her. Her gaze swept over the scene, lingering on Evan for a fraction of a second longer than on anyone else, and he saw not curiosity, but a fresh layer of resentment. "So this is my new shadow," she said, her voice cool and sharp as a shard of ice. "I had hoped for a wolfhound at least. Something with teeth, not another set of eyes to report my every breath back to my father." "Your Highness," Kellen said. Bowing deeply, Anya ignored him, walking a slow circle round Evan. He could smell the jasmine in her hair, see the fine, almost imperceptible tremor in her left hand, carefully hidden in the folds of her dress. She was angry, as she was frightened. "They tell me you are the best your kind has to offer," she said. Stopping in front of him, "They were misinformed," Evan replied. "The best are dead. I'm just what's left." A flicker of something surprise crossed her face before the mask of indifference slammed back down. "How reassuring. You will walk 10 paces behind me. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not interfere with my daily life. Is that understood?" "Understood, Your Highness," he said, "except for the part about not interfering. That's the one part of the job I can't do." The royal guards stirred, their hands drifting toward the hilts of their elegant, slender swords. Kellen took a half-step forward. "You will show the princess the proper respect." "It's all right, Captain," Anya interrupted, a strange, almost smile touching her lips. It didn't reach her eyes. "Let him have his bravado. It will be gone within a week." She turned and walked away, her every step a lesson in controlled power. "Come along, then, human. Try to keep up." The days blurred into a routine of quiet endurance. Evan was a ghost in the glittering machine of the elven court. He stood watch during Anya's endless lessons in statecraft and etiquette. He followed at the prescribed 10-pace distance during her walks in the enchanted gardens, where flowers sang in soft, chimming voices and fountains poured liquid moonlight. The royal guards were a constant, smirking presence. They made a show of their preternatural senses, pointing out a hidden bird's nest 100 yards away or identifying the vintage of a wine. By its scent alone, Evan simply watched. He learned that Princess Anya hated the candied rose petals served at tea, but would eat them to avoid offending the cook. He saw how her shoulders relaxed when she thought no one was looking, when she would pause to watch an ordinary sparrow instead of the radiant sunhawks the elves revered. He saw the careful, calculated way she navigated the court, a prisoner performing a flawless dance in her gilded cage. One evening, as Anya sat reading in a secluded courtyard, a servant approached with a tray holding a single, crystal glass of wine. The servant was new. Evan had memorized the rotation of the palace staff on his second day. He moved, not with the elf's blinding speed, but with a quiet efficiency that placed him between the servant and the princess. Before the elf had taken 2 more steps, "Her Highness did not call for wine," Evan said, his tone flat. The servant, a young elf with wide, anxious eyes, stammered, "I was told to bring it. A gift from Lord Farron, to aid her rest." Anya looked up from her book, her expression unreadable. "I have no trouble resting." "Nonetheless," Evan said, his eyes on the servant's trembling hands. "I'll take it." He took the glass, his movements deliberate. The servant bowed hastily and almost fled. Later, in the barracks he'd been assigned, Evan poured a drop of the wine onto a piece of iron he kept in his pack. The metal sizzled and turned a faint, sickly green, a subtle poison, not meant for a quick death, but for a slow, wasting illness. An accident. When he reported it to Kellen, the captain sighed with exasperation. "You are paranoid, human. Lord Farron is a loyal subject. It was likely just a tainted batch from the cellars. You see daggers in every shadow." But when Evan returned to his post outside the princess's door that night, he found a small, linen-wrapped package. Inside was a simple, crusty roll of bread, still warm from the ovens, and a wedge of hard cheese. Human food. There was no note. But when Princess Anya passed him the next morning on her way to breakfast, her summer sky eyes met his for a single, fleeting moment, and she gave him the barest of nods. The royal guard still laughed, but the sound was growing fainter, and in the quiet that followed, a new understanding was beginning to take root. The royal hunt was a spectacle of elven opulence, a vibrant scar of noise and color slashed across the serene face of the silverwood. Hounds with coats like liquid mercury bayed with voices like ringing crystal. Nobles in silks of impossible hues rode stags whose antlers glittered with captured light. At the center of it all was Princess Anya, astride a white mare, her face a carefully composed mask of regal participation. Evan, on a sturdy, earth-born horse that drew snickers from the elven grooms, kept his 10-pace distance, his eyes never still. Captain Kellen rode at the head of the procession, a figure of flawless authority. His gaze swept the forest, his pointed ears twitching at sounds Evan's human ones could never catch. The royal guard formed a perfect, moving cordon around the princess, their confidence a visible force field. The wards are extended a half-mile in every direction. Kellen had declared that morning, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Nothing with ill intent can cross them. The human may observe how real protection is performed. Evan observed. He saw the perfect lines, the magical awareness, the sheer, overwhelming power of the elven guard. And he saw the gaps. He saw how they looked through the forest, their magical senses tuned to grand threats, demonic signatures, hostile enchantments. They didn't see the forest itself. The hunt surged into a clearing, a bowl of sunlight filled with flowers that turned their faces to follow the princess. It was then that Evan's horse, a placid creature, shied violently, not at a magical presence, but at a simple, mundane scent on the wind. The sharp, coppery smell of blood, too fresh to be from the hunt. His eyes scanned the ground, ignoring the shimmering magic that hung in the air like gossamer. He saw what the elves, with their eyes on the canopy and the magical currents, missed. A single, recently snapped twig on a low-hanging branch, the break too clean, too high for a passing animal. A patch of moss near the base of an ancient oak was scuffed, As if a boot had sought purchase, "Captain," Evan called out, his voice cutting through the melodic chaos of the hunt. Kyelien turned, his expression one of profound annoyance. "What is it, human? Do you require assistance staying in your saddle?" The clearing. It's a funnel. The terrain slopes down to that stream on the far side. Perfect for an ambush. "Nonsense," Kellen scoffed, gesturing to the air around them. "The wards are undisturbed. You are seeing phantoms born of your own inadequacy." At that moment, Enya's mare, spooked by a hound that bolted too close, reared slightly. As she fought for control, a crossbow bolt, silent and devoid of any magical trace, hissed from the trees. It wasn't aimed at the princess. It was aimed at her horse's flank, a simple, brutal tactic to create panic, to send the beast bolting towards the treacherous stream where the bank was undercut, and the rocks waited beneath the surface. The royal guard, their senses tuned to a magical attack, were a heartbeat behind. They saw the bolt only after it was in flight, their reactions slowed by sheer disbelief. Evan was already moving. He hadn't seen the bolt loosed, but he had seen the flicker of movement in the dense foliage where no bird sang. He didn't try to intercept the projectile. Instead, he drove his heels into his own horse's sides, closing the 10-pace gap into thunderous strides. He leaned over, his body a shield between Anya and the trees, and grabbed the bridle of her mare, yanking its head down with brute, unelven strength. The mare, confused and overpowered, stumbled to a halt just as the crossbow bolt thudded harmlessly into the turf. Where its neck would have been, chaos erupted. The royal guard finally sprang into action, their forms blurring as they surrounded the princess. Swords drawn, magical shields springing into existence with a sound like shattering glass. They were magnificent and utterly useless. The threat was already over. Kyelien was at their center in an instant, his face pale with a mixture of fury and shock. "Your Highness, are you harmed?" Anya, her breath coming in sharp gasps, pushed a guard aside. Her summer sky eyes were wide, but not with fear. They were fixed on Evan, who had released her horse and was now scanning the tree line, his own simple sword in his hand. "I am unhurt," she said, her voice remarkably steady. "The assassin," Cowan began, "is gone." Evan finished, not looking at him. He used the sound of the hounds to cover his retreat. "He's had an escape route planned for days. You can tell by the path through the ferns over there. It's been used recently." The royal guards fanned out, their magical search revealing nothing. The assailant had left no magical signature, used no enchanted weapons. He had been a ghost, armed with nothing but cunning and mundane skill. Back at the palace, the atmosphere was thick with tension. In the war room, Kellen stood before the king's advisors, his usual composure cracked. The humans' instincts proved correct, he admitted through gritted teeth. The attacker used non-magical means. "Our wards were never breached because they were never challenged, Luck," muttered one of the older nobles. "A guess? Was it a guess when he identified the poisoned wine?" Enya's voice cut through the murmurs. She stood by the window, her back to them. "Or is it that he sees the world as it is, and not as we believe it should be?" She turned, her gaze sweeping over the assembled elves before landing on Kellen. "Captain, your guards are the finest in the land, but they look for a wolf in a world of wolves." She said, nodding toward Evan, who stood silently in the corner, "is the only one who thought to look for a snake later." As Evan resumed his post outside her chambers, the door opened. Anya stood there, still in her riding clothes. The regal mask was gone, replaced by a look of raw, unsettled curiosity. "How?" she asked, the single word holding a universe of questions. "How did you know?" He met her gaze, his own eyes the color of a winter earth. "The birds, your highness. In that part of the wood, they should have been singing. They had gone quiet." She stared at him, and for the first time, Evan saw not a princess or a prisoner, but a young woman truly seeing the man tasked with her protection. The shadow in the garden had been revealed, not by magic, but by the absence of a bird's song. And in its wake, the foundation of her world had begun to shift. The silence in the royal library was a different quality from the watchful quiet of the throne room. This was a deep, dusty hush, thick with the scent of old parchment and polished cedar. Sunlight streamed through high, arched windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced like forgotten spells. Princess Anya sat at a vast oak table. A heavy tome on celestial mechanics opened before her. But her attention was not on the stars. Her gaze was fixed on Evan, who stood by the door. His posture as still and unassuming as a piece of the furniture. "They are laughing again," she stated, her voice cutting through the quiet. She didn't need to specify who. The royal guard's amusement at Evan's lucky save in the forest had been a constant, whispered current in the palace halls. Evan didn't respond. His eyes continued their methodical scan of the room, the shadows between bookshelves, the pattern of the light on the floor, the slight draft from a high window. "It is not a skill." To them, Anya continued, pushing the book away. "It is a fluke, a primitive spasm. They believe you stumbled into the path of that bolt, that your horse reacted before your mind did." "Does it matter what they believe?" Evan asked, his voice low so as not to disturb the library's peace. "It matters to me," she said, a spark of her familiar fire returning. She stood, pacing around the table. "I am surrounded by the most powerful mages and warriors on the continent, and it was you, a human with no magic, who saw the threat they were blind to. I want to know how. I want you to teach me." That finally made him look at her. "Your Highness, do not Your Highness me, not in here," she interrupted, stopping directly in front of him. "In this room, for this, you are the master, and I am the student. Teach me to see as you see." He studied her face, the fierce determination in her summer sky eyes. This was not a command from a princess. It was a plea from a woman who had just realized the walls of her gilded cage were not just to keep her in, but to keep a dangerous world out, a world her protectors did not fully understand. "All right," he said, the word a quiet concession. "First lesson. Magic is a shout. It demands to be felt, to be seen. What you need to listen for is the whisper." He walked to the center of the room. "Look at this space. Tell me what you see with your eyes, not with your magic." Anya frowned, looking around. "I see a library, books, tables, sunlight. Be specific. Look at the floor near the history section." She looked. The flagstones were clean, polished. "I see nothing." "Exactly," Evan said. "The rest of the floor has a fine layer of dust, stirred by the morning cleaners. That patch doesn't. Someone stood there for a long time recently, and their feet kept the dust from settling." A chill went down Anya's spine. She hadn't noticed. "Lesson 2. He continued, his voice dropping. "Listen to my voice, not just my words. Am I telling the truth?" "You are teaching me," she said, confused. "Am I?" he asked, and for the first time, she heard a subtle tension in his tone, a slight tightening. "It was a lie. A test. You are not," she whispered, astonished. She hadn't used magic. She had simply heard it. "People lie with their voices before they lie with their words," he said. A catch in the breath, a change in pitch. "Your royal guards are too honorable to lie often. They are easy to read. A courtier who lies daily is harder, but the signs are still there. They touch their face. They look away. Their feet point toward the door." He moved on, showing her how a loose stone could be a tripping hazard or a weapon, how a heavy book could block a dagger, how the silvering quell on her desk could be thrown into an attacker's eyes. As the days turned into a week, their lessons became a secret shared between them. In the gardens, he taught her to notice which flowers bees avoided, hinting at poison. In the courtyards, he showed her how to walk so her footsteps were silent on the gravel. The friction of their first meeting had vanished, sanded away by a shared, intense focus. One afternoon, they were in a disused solarium, its glass panels cloudy with age. He was teaching her how to fall, how to tuck and roll to minimize injury. She was clumsy at first, her elven grace failing her in this undignified practice. "I feel foolish," she grumbled, brushing dust from her gown after a particularly ungainly tumble. "Feeling foolish is better than feeling a blade," he replied, offering a hand to help her up. His hand was rough, calloused, a stark contrast to the smooth, perfumed hands of the elven nobles. When her fingers closed around his, she felt the solid strength there, a quiet, grounded power that had nothing to do with magic. She didn't let go immediately. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Truly? You could do the minimum, collect your pay, and leave. Why risk the captain's ire?" Why care? He was silent for a long moment, his winter earth eyes searching her face. The space between them, once a mandated 10 paces, had shrunk to mere inches and had hummed with a new, unspoken tension. "Because you remind me of someone," he said finally, his voice so quiet it was almost a breath. Someone who was trapped, and no one came for her. The confession hung in the dusty air, more intimate than any touch. Anya saw the ghost of an old pain in his eyes, a story he would not tell. In that moment, he was no longer just her guard, the blunt human instrument. He was a man with a past, with losses, with a fierce, quiet heart that chose to protect even when it had been broken. She slowly released his hand, the warmth of his touch lingering on her skin. The laughter of the royal guard outside seemed 1,000 miles away. Here, in this quiet room, she was not learning about threats and tactics. She was learning about him. And with every lesson, the careful, rebellious princess found herself wanting to learn more. The Starlight Feast was the social pinnacle of the elven court, a shimmering spectacle of gossamer gowns, polished silver, and gentle, chimming laughter. The great hall was a living constellation, the ceiling enchanted to mirror the night sky outside. Each star a captured point of light. Princess Anya, draped in a gown of midnight blue silk that sparkled with tiny diamonds, was the silent, still center of the whirlwind. Evan stood in the shadows of a pillar, his dark, simple attire making him a void in the glittering scene. He watched not the dancers or the nobles, but the patterns, the way Lord Theron, a tall elf with hair the color of aged wine and a smile that never reached his cold, gray eyes, moved through the crowd. Theron was a pillar of the old families, a council member of immense wealth and influence. He was also, in Evan's estimation, a man whose feet were constantly pointing toward the throne. "He is a bore," Anya had whispered to Evan earlier, during a moment she had drifted near his post. "He speaks of tradition and bloodlines as if they were the only virtues. He believes my father's rule is too progressive." Evan had said nothing, but he had stored the information away. Another piece in a puzzle that was becoming alarmingly clear. The hunt, the poisoned wine, they were not random acts. They were tests, probes against the royal guard's defenses, searching for a weakness. And they were escalating. His investigation had been quiet, mundane, and therefore invisible to the magically attuned guards. He had spent nights in the palace archives, not reading spellbooks, but cross-referencing supply manifests and guest lists. He had walked the grounds, not sensing for magic, but looking for disturbed earth and hidden paths. He had spoken to the stable hands and the kitchen scullions, the people the nobles never saw, and the threads all led back to Theron. Shipments of steel that never reached the royal armory, but were logged as received. A particular, rare venom identified in the wine, a substance Theron's family was known to harvest for their alchemical experiments. A witness, a young kitchen maid too frightened to speak to the captain of the guard, but willing to whisper to the quiet human about a cloaked figure she saw near the princess's apartments on the night of the hunt. Evan needed proof that would convince Kellen, whose pride was a fortress as strong as the palace walls. He waited until the feast was at its peak, when Theron was holding court near the wine fountain. Surrounded by sycophants, "Captain," Evan said, stepping from the shadows to stand beside Kai Elien. The elf captain stiffened, his eyes never leaving the crowd. "This is not the time, human. Can you not see Her Highness's, Lord Theron's personal guard?" Evan interrupted quietly. "The one with the scar over his brow. Where was he during the hunt?" Kellen's jaw tightened. "Assigned to perimeter security, as is standard for visiting nobles' retinues. The perimeter where the assassin's bolt came from," Evan said. "And the night of the poisoned wine. Theron's nephew was the one who delivered the cask to the cellars. It was logged as a gift." He saw the ripple of unease go through Kellen's perfect posture. "Coincidence? Circumstantial? Is it a coincidence that Theron has been buying loyalty in the eastern regiments, with gold from mines that haven't yielded anything in a decade?" Evan pressed, his voice a low, relentless murmur. "I have the forged production ledgers. I have a witness who saw his man in the garden. He isn't just trying to kill her, Captain. He's building an army. He's planning a coup." Kellen finally turned to look at him, the emerald chips of his eyes blazing with conflict. To accept Evan's evidence was to admit his own magical, perfect guard had been blind. It was to trust the instincts of a human over the traditions of his own people. You ask me to accuse a lord of the realm based on paperwork and the word of a maid? Kellen hissed. I'm asking you to protect your princess, Evan said, his gaze unwavering. The way I have been. The way you swore to. The music swelled. Across the hall, Anya laughed at something a courtier said, the sound like bells. But Evan saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes flickered toward him and Kellen. She knew something was wrong. Kellen looked from Evan's grim face to Theron's smiling one. He saw the Lord raise a glass in a mocking toast toward the princess. And in that moment, the captain of the royal guard made a choice. His pride, his tradition, his entire worldview crumbled before a single, unshakable duty. What do you need? Kellen asked, the words tasting like ash. Your guards, Evan said, relief washing through him. Positioned at the servants' exits. He won't use the main doors. And silence. We can't spook him. The net has to be perfect. Kellen gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. The unraveling had begun, and the two most different guardians in the Silverwood Palace were now, finally, on the same side. The net was not perfect. Theron, sensing the shift in the air, moved faster than anticipated. The signal was a shattering crystal glass, not a prearranged code, but a signal of pure panic from a loyalist Lord Theron had deemed a threat. Chaos, the true weapon, was unleashed. The starlight feast became a nightmare. Elegant tables were overturned, their contents becoming shrapnel. The enchanted ceiling flickered and died, plunging the hall into a gloom pierced by flashes of hostile magic. Theron's conspirators, hidden among the courtiers, drew concealed blades and wands. The royal guard, trained for orderly defense, was immediately on the back foot, their formations shattered by the press of panicked nobility. To the princess, Kellen's voice roared, cutting through the screams. His guards fought with magnificent, desperate skill, a wall of silver and light against the treachery. But for every conspirator they engaged, two more seemed to slip past. Their goal singular, the days where Anya stood, a frozen statue in her sparkling gown, her father the king being shielded by his own personal retinue. Evan was not on the days. He was a shadow in the chaos, a creature of a different kind of war. He didn't meet blades with blades. He tripped a charging assassin with a fallen banner pole, sending the elf sprawling into the path of Kellen's counter-strike. He hurled a silver platter, not as a weapon, but as a distraction, its clatter causing Image to fumble his incantation. He used the environment, the very opulence Theron sought to claim, as his arsenal. He saw Theron, no longer smiling, cutting his way toward Anya with a blade that dripped with malevolent green energy. Kellen moved to intercept, but was locked in a duel with two of Theron's best swordsmen, the human. Theron snarled, spotting Evan, a not to be swatted. He gestured, and a wave of force hurled a heavy oak table toward Evan. Evan didn't try to stop it. He rolled under it, the wood splintering against the pillar behind him. He came up inside Theron's guard, his simple longsword a gray streak. It was not an elegant duel. It was brutal, efficient. Evan fought not to win, but to create an opening, to buy a single second. Their blades met with a shriek of metal. Theron was stronger, magically enhanced. But Evan was relentless, his movements unpredictable. Born of 1,000 street fights and battlefield brawls, he feinted low, and when Theron's enchanted blade swept down to parry, Evan dropped his own sword, grabbed Theron's wrist, and used the Lord's own momentum to spin him around. For a breathtaking moment, Theron's back was to the days, his guard open. Anya, now. Evan yelled, his voice raw. It was not a command from a guard. It was a plea from a partner. And Anya, the student, heard her master. She didn't freeze. She didn't summon a complex spell. She remembered the inkwell, the heavy, silver inkwell from her desk in the library. It was on a nearby overturned scribe's stand. She lunged, grabbed it, and with a cry that was part fear and part fury, she brought it down on the back of Lord Theron's head. The impact was sickeningly solid, not enough to kill, but enough to stun. Theron staggered, his concentration broken, the green energy around his blade flickering out. That was all the opening Kellen needed. Disengaging from his foes, he drove his sword through Theron's side. The fight left the conspirators as quickly as it had begun. With their leader fallen, their resolve crumbled in the sudden, ringing silence. The hall was a wreck. Panting guards stood over subdued traitors. The air stank of ozone and blood. Anya stood trembling, the bloodying quell still clutched in her hand. Her eyes found Evan. He was breathing heavily, a gash on his forehead bleeding into his eye. His simple sword back in his grip. Queen Serafina, her own composure shaken, looked from her daughter to the fallen Theron, to the human guard who stood between them. Her voice, when it came, was hushed with awe and a dawning understanding. "Who protects you so fiercely?" the queen asked, the question hanging in the ravaged air. Enya's gaze never left Evan. She saw the blood, the dirt, the sheer, stubborn will in his stance. She saw the man who had taught her to see the whispers in a world of shouts, who had trusted her with his past, and who had just trusted her with his life. A slow, radiant smile broke through the shock and fear on her face. "My human," she said. And in those two words, everyone in the hall understood. It was not a title of ownership, but of belonging. It spoke of a bond forged not in magic or bloodline, but in trust, in lessons learned in quiet libraries, and in the fierce, unbreakable will of a human heart. The laughter had died forever, replaced by a profound, respectful silence.